The Pew Teaching with Technology Award, an annual recognition of Grand Valley State University faculty who use technology in innovative and engaging ways, was awarded this year to two outstanding GVSU faculty. 2017's first recipient is Erica Hamilton, Assistant Professor of Leadership and Learning in the College of Education. At the heart of Professor Hamilton's teaching is her ability to leverage technology to support student learning by building relationships and connecting new knowledge with existing expertise. Her colleagues note that she is a technology leader in her college and on campus, and her students appreciate her passion, enthusiasm, and willingness to help them apply what they're learning in their own professional endeavors. Sister Lucia Trainer, a senior affiliate faculty in the Department of Writing, is 2017's second recipient. She is recognized for creating websites and videos, utilizing clickers, and incorporating audio feedback into the editing process for her students. By using online software and computerized data resources, she allows her students to become uniquely engaged in the writing process. Congratulations to both Professor Hamilton and Professor Trainer, this year's 2017 Pew Teaching with Technology Award winners.
A few years ago, I had the bad luck to step out the back door and slip on the ice and break my right hand, my right wrist.
Ouch.
And I'm a writing professor and I'm right-handed. And it just so happened that I was taking a course with Sherry Barraclough the following Monday. This happened on a weekend. And I showed up with my cast on my hand. And Sherry said to me, "What are you going to do when you have to give your comments on your papers?" And I said, "I haven't thought that far." And she said, "Well, I want to see you in my office." And she taught me, now this was back when you had to actually put in place within Blackboard, the Blackboard voice authoring piece. And it was a little bit cumbersome in those days. You put in how much time you wanted and all of that. But I did it. And I polled my students in 3 classes. I've never had a poll do this. 100% of 3 classes liked it better than the written comments. And I thought, we're on to a good thing here. Well, as time went on, then Blackboard went to their own one that you could do in tools that was easier but short. And as time went on, I now I annotate voice comments. But I've found that it's made a big difference in what I can do with my students. And I've often thought that it was an oh happy fault that I fell that day.
I didn't have to break anything, thankfully, to be able to think about doing more with audio feedback. Some of it was recognizing that just the sheer volume of typing, so a typical double-spaced page is about 200 words. And humans talk typically about 100, 150 words, sometimes 200 words a minute. And so if I were giving my students 4 or even 5 minutes of feedback, that's about 5 pages double-spaced of feedback that I can give them on their writing. The other piece that I have found, and I don't know if this has been the case for you and your students, but my students come back both at graduate and undergraduate level saying, "I could hear the tone in your voice. I could understand what that comment was." And in fact, I had an interaction with a student a couple weeks ago who we were talking about his work, and he came up and he said, "I've never received voice feedback or audio feedback before. And it was so nice," he said, "because the comments on the side, I wouldn't know how to interpret those. I wouldn't know if you were upset or if it was something I had done poorly." He said, "But I could hear in your tone the things I needed to work on, but I also appreciated that it felt like a conversation. And then I got a lot more feedback, and I was able to recognize things that the comments on the side just don't accomplish."
And the quantity, because you're able to do more,
Yep.
lets the student know immediately that you've been very attentive to what's been written here. Yep. And you really have been able to diagnose what's needed to work. And the kindness in your voice prompts them to feel happy about doing it instead of feeling like it's a burden.
So thanks to a colleague of mine, Rick Geisel, he introduced me to a tool called Vocaroo. And it is a free online audio recording website that doesn't require any login, which is wonderful, so there's no password to remember. And it will it records audio, and it's a long time. I don't typically use it for longer than about 10 minutes or 15 sometimes. But I have used it to provide students with audio feedback on their projects. I've actually also used it for students to use in lieu of doing a typed response for a weekly reading assignment, for example, where they will audio record themselves. And so I'm going to talk about how I'm learning to use that to support students in terms of the feedback I give them and to provide them with that human-to-human connection as facilitated by a technology tool. So I'm pretty excited about it, and I've had really good feedback, and I'm looking forward to sharing a little bit more about what I'm learning, but then also some other ideas I have for using the tool in the future.
And show both the department's progress in this area and my own, and then some of the fun, besides iAnnotate, which I definitely will show, because I really urge, any professor who has to do papers can benefit from using iAnnotate the way that I'm doing it. But also fun things like Jeopardy games and Kahoot and Poll Everywhere and those things that you can get to make some of the more dry things. I use the Jeopardy game, for instance, to teach MLA 8. They've got to learn it. It's very dry and dull to learn it, but it's more fun if it's Jeopardy and those kind of things. So, a little sampler.
I use a lot of different resources, and I think some of it is if there was a way to help students feel like they weren't just doing this and this and this and this, that they could see it more combined. And I would say that that's even less about my class and more about just their learning experience, because even the layout of Blackboard for some students looks different in every class. The ways that the technology is supposed to be used in one class versus another. I think part of that is that's just a challenge that students face when they're in learning environments that are facilitated by lots of different people. But I guess I'd love to see us do more collaboratively so that students' experiences weren't so segmented sometimes, because I think that gets confusing. And it's hard because then I don't want to contribute to that, but I also don't want to limit what I do with them. So I don't think I answered the question necessarily as much as just trying to think about how could we do a better job of utilizing tools and resources that students are familiar with, and that they would feel like, oh, I go from this class to this class, and yep, it's similar. I am familiar with these tools, and I can use them in different ways. Some best practices, I guess the larger thing is, first and foremost, what in the world are you using it for, and why is it going to help students learn better, and how is it going to help you be more efficient in your ability to provide feedback or to facilitate their learning. I get a little hesitant because discipline, like outside of each discipline, some of those best practices are different. So I would in no way be equipped to tell a chemistry professor how to best facilitate his or her chemistry labs, either in person or online, but that they're very thoughtful about whatever tools they get to use, that they are able to make sure that those tools best support students' learning in that environment. And so relying on those that disciplinary expertise, I think, is really important, and then using that disciplinary expertise to then think about whatever technology and tools and the kinds of learning opportunities that students have. I don't lecture a lot. In fact, I rarely lecture, because I think we do, for where I teach and how my students learn, it's best if we facilitate those in conversations, in small group activities, so there's a lot more dialogue and conversation between students that I am facilitating and supporting. But in other cases, that may be different for other faculty.
I think the biggest challenge is finding the appropriate programs. There are many, many programs, as you know, out for various things. And we read about them in campus technology or elsewhere. And the only way to find out whether they're going to be something that's useful for your classes is to preview them. And previewing takes time. There's so many things I'd like to do, but to have the time to preview, to get to the good ones.
Yeah.
And then once you've decided that this one is a potential, there's a learning curve involved with whatever this program is, and that takes time. And then if you've got a hybrid course and videotaping and all of that kind of stuff it all takes time. What you have to promise yourself is that the time that's invested up front you get back later on when you're able to reuse something and you have the facility to work with it.
I would say with higher ed too, and I don't know if this has been your experience, but there's so much that keeps coming out all the time, and so you're right about the time where, do I have the time to really look at this tool to really make it work? But then the other piece is there's so much, And in higher education, because we are in so many different colleges and we have so many different content needs and foci, then we don't, something that works for me may not be something that works for a colleague in math education, for example, or in biology, or in chemistry, or engineering. And so part of that is taking that disciplinary expertise and laying that onto the technology to figure out, is this really going to help me get where I need to go? And then infrastructure and support, because you have faculty using all sorts of technology, some that are paid, some that are free, and then when they need help, I mean, I can't even imagine from an IT standpoint how tricky that is sometimes to be able to look at what people are using, what they need, what they have, and then to be able to support all of that as well. And then students, you're absolutely right. The learning curve is also great for students, and if we don't scaffold them into the learning for that particular tool,
That's right.
because
It
it's
doesn't
not,
work if
it
it
doesn't
isn't
work, no.
Prepared properly.
Right, so you can't just say, well, just go use this tool, and you'll have students that will look at you and say, well, I've never used this tool before. So it's not only teaching content, but it's also teaching the tool itself, which means we have to know what we're doing, or be willing to learn with them. So,
And the cooperation of your department.
Yes.
I was very fortunate a few years ago to get the surprise that all of us were going to be given iPads to be able to use in the classroom. And that was wonderful. Made a big difference in what I do.
yeah. And I think collaborating too, the other piece where talking with other colleagues, finding out what they do, how they do what they do. Some of the things that I've used in the last couple of years have come directly from what my colleagues have told me about, where I've attended professional development or I've done observations of teaching, and I think, ooh, what is that they're doing? And I want to learn more. So that's the other piece too, is not to silo yourself, but to really figure out what are people doing, what's successful, and then, yeah, spending time to scaffold students' learning into the technology that they use. Yeah, so it's always tricky for me because people will say, oh, have you heard about, or have you used this, or have you used that? And I'll look at tools and I get ideas for how it might work, but I need to make sure, and that's it's always in the back of my mind, how is this going to support student learning? How is this going to enable me to do something better than I've done in the past without it? And the other piece is, what's the learning curve going to be for my students? So if it's a really easy tool, and I try to be careful not even to use that word, because for some students, easy is relative, or what I think is easy isn't easy for them. And so I just try to make sure that if I'm going to use a tool, so for example, I use Twitter, and some of my students can't stand it. And I've told them, I'm not here to sell you on Twitter, I just want you to know what you're saying yes to or what you're saying no to. But I recognize that that's not a tool that is easily intuitive, so I try to make sure that I orient them to it. We have practice opportunities, and then it's throughout the semester that we come back to it. So it's not just here, use Twitter, and then there's nothing more that we aren't checking in about. Who are you following, or what are you noticing about these hashtags, or what about Twitter chats? But that is definitely, it's a tool I value for professional learning, but I'm also doing research using that tool. At the same time, I want to make sure that students aren't just using it for the sake of using it, or they do just a little bit, but I don't follow up and give the opportunities to scaffold throughout the semester. So I try never to do that, where it's one tool just one time and we never use it again. Otherwise, that just feels like a blip, and then there's not a whole lot of deep learning that can happen. So yeah, it's trying to make sure I'm judicious and thoughtful about whatever I do. At the end of the day, it needs to improve and support students' learning. And if not, then I need to not use it.
Well, I think first of all, I can cover more ground, so that our teaching time is valuable, and you're giving the students more. Secondly, clarity. In writing programs, clarity is really important, and to help them understand various techniques in writing and strategies. The use of technology is something that clarifies so they get it faster, I think. And I guess I'd say the third thing is that teachers today have to be part entertainer and part instructor. And it helps me make my classes more fun. Today's Chronicle of Higher Education points out that a survey has been done recently that showed that the average student spends $1,300 a year on books and materials. That's a lot of money. And if we can use open content when it's available and when it's of the quality that you need for your course, that's the tricky part. We should be doing it whenever we can.
I would say piggyback off of that because I work with pre-service teachers and in-service teachers, so there is this idea that I'm using technology, but I'm also using open educational resources to support their learning. At the same time, I'm trying to help them figure out how to use those same or different resources for their own students. So it's a digital literacy, it's also a digital citizenship component, so that it's not just me saying we can use this and we can use this, because there is a cost saving certainly, and that anytime we can help students be wise with their finances in terms of their resources for education, I'm 100% behind that. On the flip side, I also want them to be thinking not as a student who's experiencing that resource, but then also as a teacher or a future teacher. Can I use this? Or what things do I need to think about when it comes to looking at online resources, and how do I best facilitate my own assessment of that resource, but then how do I also use it to support my students' learning? And part of that then is being critical, and when I say critical, I mean thoughtful, about what the tool is, what the purpose is, and how you can best use it. Because some of the resources actually are blocked in K-12 classrooms and in schools too. So then there's this double whammy where, oh, this is this great resource, but I can't use it in my school because my school blocks this, this, and this. So it's definitely important to support student learning, but then for me, it's that second step of K-12 student learning too, and how do I empower my students, both graduate and undergraduate, to be thoughtful and judicious about what they can and cannot use, or what makes sense to use, and how to help, second graders figure out this tool, or high school seniors learn how to use this tool. Because again, it's not just the content then, now it's learning how to use the tool and the resource as well.
I think about the students' needs. An example of that is I have my own website, and because of that, I've been able to eliminate the purchase of books from the students' burden, because my department produces an annual book called A Guide to First Year Writing at Grand Valley State University. And we've done this for 15 years. And over the years, my own students have had their essays in these books. And so with their permission, I'm then able to put them on my own website. And I'm able to use many of the essays of my students as models, so that I no longer have to have them purchase a reader. So that's a very practical thing that I can offer to them. They do purchase this book for the current year, but it's not too terribly expensive. And I'm able to link to the Purdue OWL site for the handbook things that they need, so they don't have to purchase a handbook either. So right away, there's a practical reason for.
So the technology that I use is generally dependent on the course I teach. So I teach both graduate level courses and undergraduate level courses. And I teach online, I teach hybrid, and I teach face-to-face. So how we use technology is going to be different depending on not only the level of the course, but also the course content, and then also the students and their needs. So, but there are some that I use regardless. So for example, I use Google Docs across all of my classes, and that's done for a variety of reasons. It allows for peer-to-peer interaction. It allows for students to provide peer feedback with each other, so whether they're working on a project. Google Docs is also really useful for an alternative to a discussion board. Not that I would suggest that discussion boards on Blackboard or other places aren't useful, but there's a lot less clicking. And the other piece with Google Docs is that students can upload images, so they can take pictures of tweets, they can diagram or use online tools, or I've had them use paper and pencil where they'll create a concept map. So it's a visual of their learning that then they can upload easily, so that it's not just text, it's also visuals. And then I've also had students record audio, so instead of having them type a response for a week, they actually record themselves using the free site called Vocaroo, and then they upload that hyperlink, and students can then listen to each other and then offer comments. So it's lots of different possibilities.
And anything that's going to be beneficial to our students and will cut down the cost for them, I'm interested in.
In every class I teach, there's always opportunities for the synchronicity of that real-time face-to-face, whether that's in face-to-face, like legitimately I'm here and you're here and we're in a classroom together, or we're online and we're having a conversation around the content and wrestling with the ideas that we're trying to apply to our context or apply to our learning. But yeah, students learn best when they feel like they have been seen and heard and that they're known. And that's true not only of being known by each other, but also known by their professor. I can't imagine teaching any other way.